They've gone up by $9 trillion. And the household debt-to-income ratio in America is 121%. And if you ask any economist what a viable ratio is, it's around 60%, 60 to 70%. So Americans are double the sort of viable amount to be in debt. And therefore, if any boom is aided by an increase in debt, we feel it's just not viable because it's coming off such a high figure. And it will automatically correct itself. And that's why you will have this kind of corrugation in the U. And when people say, how long could it last? Well, I mean, we don't like putting an extreme figure on the table. So we say 3 to 5 years. But if you want to go back to an example, it was 1966 to 1982, 16 years, when the world went up, down, up, down, up, down. In fact, the Dow Jones Industrial Index went to 1,000, down to 700, up to 1,000, down to 700, 5 occasions. So if you traded the Dow, you'd have made a lot of money in those times. That is what the U is about. But we're not hedgehogs. We don't say just bet on that scenario. There are 2 other scenarios. The first one is the optimistic one backed by Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, and Barack Obama, president of the United States. And it's a V. The green shoots are already visible. Some economies are technically coming out of recession, like Germany and Japan. And yes, we will be back in the game next year. So it's a V. It's not a corrugated U, it's a V. But we call that scenario new balls, please. It's, you know, think of tennis, think of Wimbledon. Because you are going to require new balls to play the new game. And this game is going to be different in 4 very important respects from the old game. Number one is the fact that no credit is not going to be easy for a very long time to come. And I think we all realize that. Yes, we're back to 100% mortgages with some banks, but they're going to be much more discriminating about who they're going to give those mortgages to. The second is that banks are going to be more heavily regulated, and you could see that coming out of the last G20 meeting. Thirdly, and this is the biggest thing in terms of difference in the games, is the East is going to be the economic equivalent to the West. In other words, if you add Japan, Australia, New Zealand, China, India, and the Asian tigers together, they will, as a bloc, be as influential as Europe or America. And that has huge significance for the strategy of any multinational company. Just to give you one statistic, the largest car company in America now is Toyota. So finally, they've beaten the Americans. And the last major difference in the game is that a new technology we feel will power the next boom. And yes, there will still be advances in communication technologies and IT, but we think it's going to move to energy, to new energy sources outside fossil fuels and energy savings. And the reason is simple. There's a meeting in Copenhagen in December to basically lay down new rules of the game to curb carbon emissions in light of global warming. And so we feel that over the next 10 years, you are going to see major differences in our lifestyle. I mean, 2 of the issues that are being raised at Copenhagen are, 1, carbon taxes and carbon credits, but essentially, you know, taxing any emission of carbons, which will make freight and travel more expensive. And secondly, carbon labeling, where on every product on a shelf, you actually have to put the amount of CO2 that's been emitted to get that product onto the shelf. If you press us, we feel the really big technology in the next boom will be solar technology, solar cells. I mean, it's interesting in Baghdad, all of the 3 major hospitals in Baghdad are now powered by solar technology because the national grid is too inconsistent to run a hospital. And the Americans have built these vast systems. Well, if you can power a hospital, you can certainly power a house. And we think the price of solar technology is going to come down to a level where you can install your own power unit in your backyard. And in the same way that cell phones have made telegraph lines redundant, so solar technology will over time make transmission lines redundant. So that's for us, you know, the new balls please kind of game. So that's the positive scenario. The negative scenario on the other side of hard times we call forked lightning. It's where we've gone down, we have a false recovery, and then we really go down. And you, in many ways, have a repeat of what happened with Alan Greenspan, because he pumped in money, he zeroed interest rates. This led to a boom of about 4 or 5 years, but because nobody did anything about the magnitude of debt, this led to an almighty crash. And it's just a duplicate of that experience, and we call it the forked lightning scenario. So what are the current odds we give to the three scenarios? We give a 60% probability to hard times, corrugated U. We give a 30% probability to the V, new balls please, and we give a 10% wildcard probability to forked lightning. What are the flags? Well, the flags for the V, because we presume we're in the hard times corrugated U at the moment, but for us to get more optimistic, there are several flags. One is unemployment has to fall in the United States, not slow down in terms of increasing. Because last month, for example, there were another 250,000 people made redundant in the States, and everybody thought that was good. Because only 6 months ago, 600,000 people per month were being made redundant. We feel that you've got to have a fall in unemployment. In other words, people back in work so that they, in terms of their role as consumers, they can start spending money again. The second flag is an improvement in property prices in the US so that consumers feel better off. And yeah, you can see signs that the property market in the US is bottoming out, but certainly not that it's showing significant improvement. And the third flag is a decline in the household debt to income ratio. And that is the critical one, because there is no way you can have a sustainable recovery if that ratio does not come down. At the moment, all those flags are down, and that's why we give only half the probability to that scenario to our central scenario of hard times. On the other side, we feel that what will increase the probability of forked lightning is some exogenous shock to the system, and we have 4 shocks. Number one, a trade war between China and America. We've had the first shots. The Americans have put duties on Chinese tires, and the Chinese have put duties on American chickens. And so there's the first kind of, you know, sort of firing of bullets, but it hasn't led to a war yet. And so, yeah, we think that flag is down. We call it the protectionist flag. The second flag is a real war. You know, lots of people think real wars are good for the global economy, but they're not. If you look at the Second World War, the Dow Jones started and ended the war at the same level. It went down to 1942 and it went up again and it finished at the same level that it started. So this idea that wars are good for the world economy, not so. They're good for some industries. And we think particularly if there's a war in the Middle East over something like the nuclear ambitions of Iran, or indeed growing anarchy in the west of Pakistan, that would be extremely bad news for the global economy, because the oil price would probably go up to between $300 and $500 a barrel, and that would be a showstopper. The third flag is a national bankruptcy of note. I mean, we've had one already. We've had Iceland, but nobody cared. It's a little island in the middle of the Atlantic. As somebody said the other day, what's the capital of Iceland? $2. So, you know, but if a European Union member starts defaulting on its foreign debt, total difference. And when Chantal did some work last year in Brussels for the European Union, they actually had a list of potential defaulters. And the number one country on their list was Ireland.